Hey everyone, it is Friday. That means it's time for my weekly MTG Top 10. Eldritch Moon was fully spoiled like a week ago, I guess. And so for the next couple weeks, we'll be talking about some of my predictions for Eldritch Moon. And so this week we're looking at my picks for the top 10 Eldritch Moon cards for constructed formats. I'll be specific about what formats I'm talking about unless I'm talking about standard, in which case you should probably assume that. I might still say standard. I'm just sort of giving you guys that information in case I forget to actually say the word standard. So let's go ahead and look at what my picks are. We'll start at number 10, where we have Liliana the Last Hope. I actually have my doubts about her power level in Constructed. Her +1 and -2 are good, not great abilities, but she's still a low-costed Planeswalker, and all of them who aren't named Tybalt tend to see play somewhere or another, at least in Standard. I could see her showing up in Standard in a Planeswalker-centric deck or control deck, and she does bring a lot of value for only 3 mana, especially if you can keep her in play. But, you know, she's kind of on this list sort of as a concession that I think she'll probably end up seeing play, but I don't actually think she's amazing. But, you know, 3 mana Planeswalker can do a lot of work. Next, we'll go to number 9, where I have Hamlet Captain. After Shadows of Innistrad, the only tribe that really saw success in Standard was humans. And if that continues, it seems reasonably likely that Hamlet Captain starts showing up in banned versions of the deck, especially those that run Collected Company until it rotates out. It is a pretty great target to hit with Collected Company, especially if you've already got an army built, because you can cast the company at the end of your opponent's turn, grab yourself a Hamlet Captain and, you know, a Reflector Mage or something, and then swing with a full board of humans who get the Anthem effect from Hamlet Captain. I think it is likely that, at a minimum, people give this reprinted Captain, because it is a reprint from the old Innistrad, a try in Standard, and the environment seems good for him, I think. At number 8, I have Gnarlwood Dryad. A Delirium deck wasn't quite ready to roll in Standard after Shadows of Innistrad, even with a strong card like Mindrack Demon. A lot of pros tried it out and it just didn't work for them. But I think maybe, just maybe, in Eldritch Moon, Delirium got pushed enough that maybe it can put up a fight in Standard. And I think Gnarlwood Dryad is a good example of that. It's a 1-mana 1/1 with Death Touch, and that's not the worst fail case ever. But in a deck that is geared toward getting Delirium quickly, which is entirely possible, it will quickly become a 3/3 and one for a very efficient cost. Standard, I think, is the only place this thing can see success, but I don't know. I mean, there are graveyard strategies in Modern that could potentially take advantage of it, but it's hard to say. At number 7, we have a card sort of related to this, and I have them together for a reason. We have Grim Flayer. The Flayer comes with a reasonable body just like the Dryad, but it also has an Enter the Battlefield trigger that helps you hit Delirium and also lets you set up the top of your deck if you want to. It becomes a 4/4 when it has Delirium, making the trample it has a lot more relevant. I have these 2 cards back to back because their success is probably contingent upon the success of the other, but these 2 plus Mindrack Demon seems like a pretty good core of a Delirium deck. So, you know, I could see it happening. At number 6, I have Murder. This one's a little boring, but there isn't a whole lot of instant speed, unconditional removal in Standard right now, and this fits the bill. I don't see it being more than maybe a one of in main boards of decks right now, but one main board, one sideboard doesn't seem bad in a world where Ultimate Price and Grasp of Darkness aren't the best removal spells against all opponents, and Murder can get jobs done that those 2 cards can't, so I think it's reasonable that it'll see some play somewhere. So at number 5, I have Thalia Heretic Cathar. I always think it should be Heretical Cathar, but I mean, I guess it makes sense, but using an adjective there makes more sense to me. But anyway, at number 5 rather, we have Thalia. I think she's probably actually well positioned for both Modern and Standard, because both have mana bases right now with tons of non-basic land, especially Modern. And this Thalia slides right in next to the other Thalia and Hate Bears decks in Moderns, where slowing down decks for a few turns is already a big deal. If you have both Thalias in play, that's some pretty sweet value. You're making your opponent have to pay 1 more, and then all their lands come into play untapped. I mean, it's pretty great. She does have the downside, of course, of dying to basically every removal spell that ever existed, but if you got your Hate Bears deck going, at least you're going to make your opponent have to play a little more. In Standard, she can do the same thing, but she doesn't sort of have the synergy of other Hate Bears to really help her out. Mana bases also aren't quite as non-basic centric, and that's probably only going to get less non-basic centric as when the battle lands rotate out, but we'll see. There's always non-basics around, I guess. But Thalia, I think we'll see play. Efficient body, does a lot of work. I think she'll see play somewhere, if not in Modern, then in Standard. Number 4, we kind of have another boring card like Murder. It's an efficient removal spell that can deal with creatures who have troublesome death triggers, like Hangerback Walker and Matter Reshaper, 2 of the ones that see the most play right now. It can also go to the Dome, making burn perhaps slightly more viable before Origins rotates out. Number 3, we have one of my favorite cards from the set, Spell Queller. This card is very sweet, both design-wise and for constructed. A 3-mana 2/3 flyer with flash is solid stats already, probably not enough to get it into a deck on its own, but the fact that it actually eats an important spell, I mean, it doesn't have to be important, but ideally, you use it against a removal spell or even a ramp spell, that's where you can really hurt a ramp opponent, makes it pretty amazing. It's true that it dies, that if it dies, your opponent gets to cast the same spell anyway, but the delay you've given them is already a pretty big deal. I guess this actually goes pretty well with Thalia as well in a weird way. But the delay you've forced on them is already a big deal. They're not going to be casting the card at the ideal moment anymore. If you use this against a counter spell, that's where you're probably going to get the ultimate value because something like a negate just isn't going to do anything anymore, even if they kill your Spell Queller. And there's also a ton of creatures with flash in standard right now, most of which are blue-green, but it seems like a Bant flash deck has a number of sweet value creatures with flash to go around. You could hold on to counter magic. Might be something I test myself as much as I like Spell Queller. So let's go ahead and look at number 2. Number 2, I have Emrakul the Promised End. Ramp decks are still around in Standard, they're still around in Modern, and Emrakul seems like a possible target for both those kinds of decks. He's huge, he's not easy to kill or block, and he lets you play one of your opponent's turns. It's a hard thing to recover from, even though you get an extra turn after someone Emrakul's one of your turns, Mindslavers your turn, because you can just ruin their board in a lot of ways. I mean, granted, if they have an empty hand, you can't do much other than slam a creature into Emrakul or something like that. But generally, you're going to be able to do some things. You know, you mess with some of the spells in their deck, target them with their own creatures, cast spells and counter them with their own things, use activated abilities against their own target of the card using the activated ability. There's just a lot you can do in most situations. Kill their planeswalker. Granted that they still get the emblem, so that's not exactly ideal. But you can do a lot of things to hurt your opponent. And I think Emrakul, I think it's probably one of the best places for a sideboard is against a combo deck because you can just completely dismantle their combo, especially in Modern. If you're playing against Ad Nauseam, you can just if you resolve Emrakul, which they're not going to do a whole lot to keep you from resolving things against them, what they just do is delay when they lose the game. But if you play Emrakul, you can just cast you can cast Ad Nauseam, and just kill them for one thing. And I mean, that's one of the best matchups, but any combo deck it would be good against because you can just throw their combo pieces in the dumpster and light them on fire and they're never going to get them back. So I can see it as a sideboard for Tron and Modern, and I can see it as being a ramp target in Standard as well. So let's look at what I have at number 1. At number 1, I have Unsubstantiate. I don't see this card making much headway in Modern, mostly because it's mostly a worse remand. But I imagine that it will be good in Standard. It isn't quite remand, like I said, but because it doesn't cantrip. But this card can still wreck a lot of decks in Standard. Stopping a board sweeper or other high converted mana cost card with this thing, which there are a decent number of, even if it's just like Gideon or something like that, is a pretty big deal. Like the tempo hit your opponent takes is huge. They don't get the token that turn. They have to recast Gideon. It's just huge. On top of that, it can bounce creatures if it has to, and that's sometimes relevant. And to me, it just seems too flexible and reasonably costed not to see play somewhere in Standard. Blue decks will be around. Blue is a strong color right now, and I think it will continue to be in part because of cards like Unsubstantiate. So that's my list. Are there any cards you think I left out? Are there any that you think I'm overrating? You should let me know in the comments. And if you want to make sure you get a sweet top 10 list every week, don't forget to click the subscribe button below. Thanks for watching.